The Jewish nation is not based on race. The Jewish nation is not based on ethnicity. The Jewish nation is based on culture and religion. The Bundist movement includes both religious and non-observant Jewry. The political position of the Jewish Bund is not anti-religious. The political position of the Jewish Bund is non-religious. Chabad is a problem, no doubt about this, but they got one thing correct: outreach. Yet they never cut off Zionists who seek to give Judaism a cure, as if being Jewish was some kind of infection. Occidental secularists, who have their hands in Hollywood and the vile statist governments of America and Israel, capitalists who are involved in dirty business and mafia exploitation of the poor, Americanists who pretend that no injustice has been carried out against the Native American peoples. The policy of the Bundist movement are orthodox in nature. We will take over the modern Orthodox Jewish institutions. First, by instituting our own Jewish outreach centers, then by strangling all Zionist control over the modern Orthodox Jewish institutions. All those who seek the ultra-Orthodox Jewish way of life, we will direct them towards Neturei-Karta. Rabbi Moshe Hirsch was a member of Neturei-Karta. I am as uncertain, very uncertain, as to when this news clip aired. I mean, I could make a guess, but I don't want to risk inaccuracy, because I do think I know when, but I'm not entirely sure. So because I'm not entirely sure, I won't risk giving a date. But I've been very aware of this clip for a while. That's before it became known on YouTube. So what I know for sure is that at the very start of this film, the person studying with Rabbi Moshe Hirsch is his son, Rabbi Meir Hirsch. Rabbi Meir Hirsch. One of the best features of Neturei-Karta is that they accept both Hasidim and Miknagim within their membership. They may even take strands from the Sephardim. Neturei-Karta leaps beyond sectarianism within the ultra-Orthodox. And so, the fact that Neturei-Karta disqualifies Chabad, which was known as an ultra-Orthodox sect of Judaism, the fact that Neturei-Karta has disqualified Chabad some time ago says much about that situation, as they are very non-sectarian about the ultra-Orthodox positions. Anyway, in early February of this year, of 2018, Rabbi Meir Hirsch was interviewed by Dr. Weisfeld in the city of Jerusalem.
Meet Rabbi Hirsch.
I am the Minister for Jewish Affairs.
But not in Israel. He's the Minister of Jewish Affairs in Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat's cabinet. He's the Palestinians' rabbi.
The state of Israel will never have the right to exist. The Jewish nation will exist in the Holy Land when God redeems the Jewish people through his Messiah.
Rabbi Hirsch thinks Yasser Arafat should rule the Holy Land, not the Jews.
The English were here, they left. The Turks were here and they left. And we were left stateless. So when Mr. Arafat says, I am setting up a kosher state and a kosher sovereignty, what could be better?
Strange words in the context of the Arab-Israeli conflict, which has pitted Palestinians against Zionists for decades. Rabbi Hirsch is always there when Arafat greets world leaders in the West Bank and Gaza.
Well, in our eyes, a state of Israel does not exist, and it will cease to exist. Whether the Messianic era will appear in our lifetime or not, we are in the hands of God.
All right, so now as for this next clip, which also has Rabbi Moshe Hirsch in it, and you're also going to see in the same video Yasser Arafat. I do not know when this aired or if it's from a documentary or where it came from. However, the previous one, as I stated, I had seen it several times, and I know about Rabbi Moshe Hirsch, who is dead, sadly. but his son is alive and has taken over his position. But anyway, I don't know where this next film came from originally, but I do know that it was posted on the Naturia Carta's YouTube channel, as that's where we had gotten it from. And it's a matter of public information, so it fits perfectly fine with this documentary, and I do want everyone to see this.
We take great pleasure in presenting to you our beloved President Abu Ammar, this precious time instrument. We adjusted one set of the dials on the watch according to the biblical pattern of measuring time of life. The Western world uses another clockage system based on 12 o'clock midnight. But we, the Palestinians, Jewish and Muslims, use the one based on the day beginning after the sun sets. We hope and pray that this sacred watch will benefit the Palestinian people, led by its noble leader, President Abu Ammar, by enabling them to conform with King Solomon's prudent analysis of time in Ecclesiastes 3. May we all be worthy of witnessing the Messianic era, a paradise for the human race on earth in our time, inshallah.
Thank you.
I do know.
Mr. President, can I ask you 3 questions
Yes,
about the
yes.
relation with Rabbi Hirsch?
Very old relation. We can say that more than 20 years ago.
You appreciate him?
Yes, and I am very happy to have. I am very proud to have this relation with him.
What you can tell us about Rabbi Hirsch?
He is my brother, and I used to call him my father.
The road is long.
I'm going to clear up a big misconception. There is a major misconception that the Islamic Republic of Iran is hostile to Judaism and the Jewish people, and this is just a flat-out lie. I am not making the claim that Iran has no problems, but if you pay attention, everybody's hyping up these protests in Iran, which largely have to do with economic protests, as in protests against capitalism. We also know that there's provocateuring going on. Now, it should be to a different documentation that all the subject concerning Iran should be dealt with. But what needs to be approached right now is that there's a Jewish population of Iran. They have one of the highest Jewish populations, and they're not persecuted for being Jewish over there. There may at times be some discrimination, as all groups get discriminations from time to time in Iran, but it's not as bad as the United States of America. I'm sorry, in the United States of America, discrimination is almost like a social policy. Whereas in Iran, anybody that discriminates against anybody is often shunned. And that's a fact. Because it does happen, but they get shunned. Because it's not the social norm in Iran. It's also not true that there's a big persecution of Sunni Muslims in Iran. That's just not true. Yes, the dominant philosophical outlook of Iran is Shia. But that's because of the characteristics of Iran. We can get into this deeper on another documentary, as I had said just before. That being said, I want to make it clear that the Jewish people of Iran are proud Iranian citizens. And by the way, Iran is the same exact thing as Persia. And if you know anything about Judaism, the strongest root of Judaism is not Greek civilization, and it's not even the Babylonian civilization that came before Persian dominance. It's Persian society that really kicked off Judaism. You should read the Book of Esther. Whether it's an allegory or a myth or completely literal is not really relevant. Again, the Bundist movement is a political organization, a political movement, a political drive in defense of Jewish autonomy, okay? But one cannot escape the fact that Judaism is a cultural religion and no Judaism equals no Jewish person, all right? But Bundism is a political position. Therefore, the motivations here are political. So we have a hostile state of Israel that's constantly trying to provoke Iran. Iran has a right to defend herself. I'm going to make that clear. Iran has a right to defend herself. No one should have nuclear bombs, period. But as long as the great big Western powers have nuclear bombs, it's kind of sick, twisted, and vile to suggest that a country like Iran shouldn't have a nuclear bomb. So the Iran deal is another thing that is for, again, that all goes to a different documentary, and hopefully we will be able to get to that in a documentary. But right now we're going to approach this topic. The Jewish citizens of Iran, who are, by the way, proud citizens of Iran. The Jewish citizens of Iran are very proud to live in Iran. And from what I've gotten from many of them, they actually are afraid of the state of Israel more than anything. That's what they're really afraid of. Because Judaism is respected in Iran. It's not as respected in the state of Israel as a lot of people are led to believe, as they are deceived to believe. This is a clip from a documentary called Don't Tell My Mother I'm in Iran. This aired on National Geographic in the year of 2008.
Another surprise in Tehran is this address I was given. It belongs to an antiques dealer. I thought in Iran he and his kind were in hiding like the Warhols or Vazirellis. Apparently not.
Hello, 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 welcome, welcome. Ça va bien?
Hey.
Bonjour, monsieur. Hello, sir.
Live la France!
Vive la France!
Tea?
Tea?
Vodka?
Vodka.
Baba Moshe is Jewish.
Okay, so vodka in the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Vodka!
Okay.
Or Jewish, okay?
Jewish, no problem?
No.
Chin chin.
L'chaim.
L'chaim. So you make it?
Quiche meat.
Yes, it's homemade from grapes.
La maison.
Dans la maison. Ah, très joli. So we've got alcohol and naked women. Clearly, this is a different place in Tehran. Is it easy to be Jewish here?
Yes, it's very nice here. They let us be. All the rest is just lies. Here we have fun with Muslims. We laugh together, and no one bothers us. I can't obviously guzzle booze in front of the mullahs, but Iranians are great.
Actually, for Jews and other religious minorities, times were hard after the Islamic Revolution. But today, the situation has gotten better.
Is there a synagogue here in Tehran?
Yes, there are 25 synagogues in Tehran.
25 synagogue Jewish in here? Can I go to a synagogue? Picture! Now I can go to synagogue.
So I'm here in
the heart of Tehran and the capital of the Islamic Republic. And this is one place I never thought I'd get to wear a kippah. I'm in one of the biggest synagogues of the city, and it's true that it's hard to imagine that there's a Jewish community in a country where the president says that he wants to destroy Israel.
I've been invited here by Siamak Mercedeh, one of the pillars of the Jewish community.
It's absolutely incredible. They just brought out the Torah, and I must say these are images that I never thought I would see in Iran, that's for sure. This is really incredible to meet an Iranian Jew. I never thought I would. How is it to be a Jew in Iran?
You must remember that Iranian Jews are living in Iran and are Iranian for more than 30 centuries. So it's not an interesting phenomenon. Maybe interesting also that Iran has the greatest population of Jews in the Middle East after Israel. Of course, being a religious minority in a religious country has some problems, but they are not majors.
People compare, I think, a little bit, you know, the condition of Jews here to the condition of Jews in Germany before the war. You know?
They are not. They cannot be compared with each other, because in Germany was faced with a fascist and racist regime, but in Iran we do not have a fascist system. Maybe there are some conflicts between Iranian government and Israel, but it does not affect the life of Iranian Jews, because according to Iranian thoughts and Iranian government and also Iranian people, there is a distinct separation between Zionism and Judaism.
Yeah, of course.
So the political conflicts between Iranian government and Zionists does not affect the day-to-day life of Iranian Jews.
Iranian Jews, great. Is it a mix here between Iranian art culture and Judaism?
Correctly. Correctly.
Yeah?
It's a combination between Iranian culture and Jewish culture, which you can see in many of Iranian synagogues.
Mercedeh wants to show me another of Tehran's temples, the Temple of Politics. Welcome to the Iranian Parliament. The constitution here guarantees that every ethnic and religious minority has a parliamentary seat. And Mercedeh represents Iran's 25,000 Jews.
Here I am inside of the Iranian parliament, and I mean, what is surprising about Iran is that Iran is a democracy. It's an Islamic democracy with its own rules, but it remains a democracy.
And in the region, the other big democracy is Israel, obviously with its own rules also. Mercedeh is rarely at a loss for words, but he never drifts far from Iran's political line.
You feel also the ambition of Iran to become a world, you know, a power.
Of course, Iran is a power in, at least in the region and the Middle East, and no one can do anything in this region without respecting to the benefits of Iranian people and Iranian nation, of course.
Yeah, Iran is a democracy, right?
Yes.
Israel is a democracy.
Yes.
So why can't these two democracies find a common ground?
Israel is a new country which is formed by the forces from outside the region. But Iran is an old country with history roots many years ago. So this cannot be compared with each other. Of course, in Israel you say that many different people are victims of homicide and victims of intolerance and victims of obligation.
You mean the Palestinians?
Yes.
Yes, yes. I think it's the first time in my life that I hear a Jew criticizing Israel.
It's not the first time. I think you must change your idea. You can see the many people in the Jewish population in different parts of the world who are criticizing the Israel. For example, Noam Chomsky.
Yeah, Noam Chomsky, yeah.
Or other different people. For example, the Progressive Association of Jews in Europe is an association which is formed at first to fight against fascism.
Isn't that interesting? That's, by the way, one of my favorite documentaries, as that documentary is completely factual. Especially as it intertwines with my experience of Iran. That's why I get a lot of ridicule, by the way, as I'm an eyewitness. I tend to shatter people's fictional universes they live in. I get mocked often personally for believing in myth, because people are like, well, you believe in science or myth? I believe in myth, but I believe myth is truth. But that doesn't mean I'm irrational. I know what reality is. So you may think that you're all great knowing this or that, but me, and others like me, have seen more than you. So, that's another thing about the Bund. The Bund is more concerned by what you know about this world as to opposed to what you believe. Although, within a Jewish context, we do care kind of about what you believe. So much as to whether you believe in God or not is not exactly it. Our concern largely is are you cultured in the Torah? Do you recognize that we belong to a society of a religious covenant, because that's what the Jewish people are, a society of the religious covenant of Mount Sinai. And once again, that's irrelevant whether you believe the events of Mount Sinai with Moses are true or not. Whether you believe it or not is not a Bundist question. It's the values of the Sinai covenant, the religious Sinai covenant and the Torah culture. That is largely what defines, not largely, that is what defines World Jewry, and that is what defines Judaism. By the way, no Judaism, no Jewish. No Judaism, there's no Jewry, okay? So, I do hope people go to and order from National Geographic that documentary, because it's really good. The name of the documentary, once again, is called Don't Tell My Mother I'm in Iran. I strongly suggest you watch it. Now, I will direct you to a news clip. This news clip came out on September 16th of 2016. Please watch.
Former US Secretary of State Colin Powell's emails were recently leaked, and the latest revelations have come from them in confirmation that the US is well aware of the real extent of Israel's nuclear arsenal. RT's Paula Sleer has the details.
If you look at this leaked email correspondence of the then U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell, what certainly is clear is that Powell acknowledges Israel's nuclear arsenal. Now, this has always been an open secret, particularly between the United States and Israel. It is, if you can call it, nuclear ambiguity. Here in Israel, whenever you question Israeli politicians as to whether or not Israel has nuclear weapons, they always answer with the standard no comment. And this is so as not to confirm or deny, and also leave a question mark as to how many nuclear weapons Israel has, if indeed it does have. But what we see in this email correspondence also is Powell rejecting at that time assessments that Iran was a year away from building a nuclear bomb. Powell also goes on to say that Iran's nuclear arsenal and rational self-interest meant that the construction and the testing of any kind of Iranian nuclear weapons would be a harshly unlikely policy decision by the Iranian leadership. Take a look at some of the correspondence.
Anyway, Iranians can't use a nuclear bomb if they finally make one. The boys in Tehran know Israel has 200, all targeted on Tehran. As Ahmadinejad said, what would we do with one? Polish it?
Now, Powell has not denied the authenticity of the email correspondence, but what is interesting is that parallel to this correspondence and these assessments taking place, the United States introduced many harsh measures against Iran for allegedly trying to build a nuclear bomb, while at the same time critics would argue Israel was safe and secure. There were also questions being asked as to whether or not the United States is knowingly violating its own laws. There is a lawsuit that has been filed in a federal court in Washington, D.C. And according to this lawsuit, the United States aid to Israel is illegal because under another law, any kind of American aid that is given to a country, a nuclear power that has not signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, is illegal. And Israel, of course, as you know, is not a party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. As of yet, there hasn't been any comment here in Israel. We've been trying to reach any kind of politicians, but of course it is the Sabbath, and at the same time it's highly unlikely that their standard response will again be no comment.
You know, in retrospect, I cannot help but think about the American crisis that happened in World War II after the Pearl Harbor bombing, where Japanese American citizens, who almost all of them were loyal not to Japan but to the United States of America, they were stuck in internment camps. They didn't do this to all the German American citizens or all the Italian American citizens. They only did this to German American citizens and Italian American citizens that they confirmed were in pro-fascist groups. And then you have the Wall Street guys who really were part of an attempted fascist coup against FDR, and not a single of them seem to have gotten prosecuted. That's interesting. But almost all the American Japanese citizens were put in internment camps, and there's been pretty much almost no, if none, that is, no evidence of any dual loyalty. Yet, dual loyalty is okay when the subject of the State of Israel is concerned. The reason for this is simple. Americanism and Zionism come from the same root. You see, Zionism isn't Jewish. It's just not Jewish. And then furthermore, there are a lot of people who are angry at the dual loyal concept, like I am, but again, I put America into question as well, not just Israel. But Americanism and Israel intertwined, just as Zionism and America are intertwined. It's intertwined. It's a type of colonialism and a war on the indigenous, hiding behind religion while actually being hostile to religion. That being said, Iran has a right to defend herself. Just so nobody gets this confused, I'm also fully aware that during World War I, which back then was called the Great War, during this World War I period, there was a massive anti-German sentiment throughout the United States of America. Okay? I was referencing World War II. I shouldn't be so long-winded, but I already know which kind of audience is going to attack this documentary. I know how many sides. I'm going to get the Zionist backlash, I'm going to get the anti-Jewish backlash, and the Zionist anti-Jewish backlash. I'm going to get backlashes everywhere. I'm also going to get the pro-blind, shrink-wrapped brained Americanists yelling at me, and of course the Americanists who are in denial that they're Americanists, and the Americanists that are proud Americanists. I'll also get the confused constitutionalists that should actually have a higher perspective. I do have faith that the real constitutionalists will understand this documentary and cherish it as a valuable piece of dissent and free speech. But I won't hold my breath. You know, you got a lot of rhetoric, but let's just face it, Alex Jones, if you remember, he used to use a lot of constitutional rhetoric, but then again, he always used whatever was good for his conspiracy theorist market. I don't lump all the conspiracy theorists together, just so you know, but it is a market, and Alex Jones is probably at the top of that market. He probably has monopolized the conspiracy theorist market. And that's not a Jewish problem. That's a capitalist problem. I have allies in different political groups that say he's a liberal Americanist. Maybe he is a liberal Americanist, but really what he is he's basically hiding the real conspiracy of capitalism, as that's what his business is all about. That's why he always calls genuine capitalism crony capitalism. And, you know, there's that trend of calling genuine capitalism crony capitalism, or calling it corporatism. Even though corporatism is not possible in the United States of America, if the fascist tendency known as corporatism was ever to arise in a country of the West, it would be in England, by the way. American fascism could never be corporatist in nature. Most people have no clue what that stuff means. And they quote Gregor Strasser, saying he was the enemy of the capitalists, but then claim that Hitler said it. There's all kinds of crazy crap going on by the internet dummies. Now, I understand the internet is a great tool to put out information if you know how to play the popularity contest. But anybody can say whatever they want for the most part, and that's kind of why you have to question it. There's this old meme I used to see where this kid goes, "Yes, it must be true because it was on the internet," or something to that effect, and that's largely what I have to put up with. Of course, I've caught several of the people who heckle me and yell at my friends and my allies. I've caught several of them in the act of actually turning out to be spooks, or otherwise known as feds. That means agents obviously being paid by a corporation or probably working for some intelligence agency. That happens more on the internet, and that's the more high-tech COINTELPRO that we're dealing with today. This is a picture of Dr. Abraham Weiswald at the grave of Yasser Arafat. I would say that this is a very, very important photo. He was warmly received. Now, it is very, very important to understand that Palestine has a population of Muslims and Christians. And there's even a Jewish population. And I'm not just talking about ancient Israelite groups like the Samaritans. There is a Jewish population of Palestine. You can even say that although Palestine is the land of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, it's also the land of Druze and Samaritans, which you'll find that that's related as well. You get back into the antiquity of this group, there's a lot more to be seen than what is promoted. And in fact, it's shocking that people who hide behind scriptures don't seem to realize this. And I'll tell you why. It's because they're not reading scriptures. Just go to a Pentecostal rally. You'll notice that all the guy is doing is holding a Bible in his hands and yelling at you. And if he reads any verses, it'll be more than 2 or 3 verses. Then he'll accuse the Catholics of not reading when actually they do read. Although illiteracy was a problem for the Catholics for a long, long time, this is a problem that many of them have overcome, and you could say that they have some of their bigger Bible studies, and that they understand these scriptures better because, of course, they can be traced back to the early church. Now, one must understand that Jewish-Muslim relations are much closer than Jewish-Christian relations. This does not mean that there are not Christian relations with Jewish people. What it means is that Jewish-Muslim relations are much stronger. In fact, from a strictly Orthodox sense, and I myself adhere to this. In fact, most of the people in the Bundist movement feel this way, although this is not exactly official policy. But most of us feel this way. Most Jewish people would feel very dirty walking into any type of Christian building, referring to a religious building or even a charity building. Coming from an Orthodox perspective, I myself adhere to that. I cannot walk into a Christian parish without feeling dirty. As no, the Jewish religion and the Christian religion are not innately enemies. However, as far as stances of morality, purity, and notions like that, the two most monolithically squared off religions, these would be Christianity and Judaism. The two closest religions of all time would not be Buddhism and Hinduism, or Taoism and Confucianism, or Sikhism and Jainism. No, the two closest religions of all time would be Judaism and Islam. Now, this is not a hostility towards Christianity. It's just that any real Christian, whether it's an Armenian coming from the Oriental Orthodox Church, or whether it's a Greek coming from the Eastern Orthodox Church, or whether it's a Roman Catholic or a Chaldean coming from the Catholic Church, genuine Christians are aware of this separation. In fact, I guess you could say the plagiarizing of Judaism and the plagiarizing of Christianity is partially what's put Jewish and Christian groups together in solidarity. Now all of a sudden we have an appreciation for those differences, and that's a good thing in a way. Go figure. It should not take disaster for us to find solidarity, but it has, nonetheless. Being that said, we've always had solidarity with the Muslims. And many Muslims who are educated in their own religion are fully aware of this, and many Jewish people who are educated in their own religion are aware of this. Now, it is true that Islam is not a cultural religion, whereas Judaism is a cultural religion. The religious rituals and the perception of the one God, identical. Okay? Yes, Muslims believe that Jesus is the Messiah, whereas Christians believe Jesus is the Messiah and the Savior, and the Muslims reject the idea that Jesus is the Savior, just to be clear, but they do recognize him as the Messiah. So this is a gulf. It's not really a gulf between Jewish and Muslim. It is definitely a dogmatic difference, though. Like, I could never embrace the concept of Jesus as the Messiah. That's like the most repugnant concept to me. However, I'm not offended by people that do believe Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus clearly has inspired a lot of interesting notions for a lot of people. So, there's nothing for me to get upset about. So, of course, Jewish people do not believe Jesus is the Messiah. That's a contradiction to Judaism altogether. And again, no Judaism equals no Jewish. Alright? So if you embrace Jesus in any form of that sort, you're not really Jewish. Or you have defected from World Jewry, and we have always maintained that. In fact, that's like the one for sure way beyond all things to defect. Although we are now, as Bundists, starting to really equate Zionism as another way of defecting, because we see the dangers of Zionism. And we see Chabad as another reason, because Chabad has completely divested from Judaism. Their concept of Messiahhood is in complete contradiction to what Judaism has always said. Therefore, Chabad is no longer Jewish. Now, if you look at this picture, as you see it, this is two Palestinian soldiers. And you see our beloved Dr. Abraham Weisfeld standing there at the grave of Yasser Arafat. By the way, he never stands a 10 hut, but he is in this sense. I'm the same way. I never stand 10 hut. You put me around Marines, I'm never going to salute them. And I definitely won't salute Israeli soldiers. But I would if it was the PLO. If it's the PLO or Al-Fatah PLO, if it's anything to do with the Palestine Liberation Organization, I would 10 hut to that. That's worth doing so. And that makes perfect sense from a Bundist point of view. This is the mandate to proclaim a permanent dismantlement of the State of Israel. The State of Israel has proven to be a threat to the Jewish people, the Palestinian people, and its very own citizens, having rogue foundations hostile to World Jewry, the indigenous Palestinian population, even showing many cases of Ashkenazi racism towards the Mizrahim and the dark-skinned African refugees. Palestinians suffer under apartheid. The Mizrahim and the dark-skinned African refugees suffer under Jim Crow and Jane Crow's social norms. Proclamation 1. All of World Jewry is called Israel, therefore no country has the right to use that name. Proclamation 2. The new word to describe the refugee people is changed henceforth to Lizroidi, as the word Israeli is defamatory, showing an insensitivity to both those Jewish and those Palestinian. Proclamation 3. The dark-skinned African peoples who have joined the Lizrodi people shall remain as part of the Lizrodi nation. Proclamation 4. Number 1. Funding for all Israelis who want to leave. Number 2. Right of return for the Palestinians. Number 3. Ending the Zionist right of return. Number 4. End of the apartheid state calling itself Israel. Number 5. Foundation of a multinational democratic federation. No more State of Israel. This project is called the Palestinian Hebrew Democratic Federation. Okay, so Now I am going to make a word about something here that you should hear. Neturei Karta, as it is known, and once again, everything that I espouse to you, everyone, in this documentary is a matter of public record. Now, the then Prime Minister of, I believe that was his position, of Iran, was met with by Neturei Karta. Neturei Karta came to meet him. And this was a very, very important event. As I have already expressed what you should know about Iran. The Jewish people have a long history in Iran. It is definitely the case that our history with Babylon kind of predates our history with Iran. Iran being Persia, that is. However, is probably some of the best experience for the Jewish people. So, Babylon, sometimes bad, sometimes good. Then you have Persia, and that was really good. And then with the Greeks, sometimes good, sometimes bad. With the Romans, that's not a really good period for the Jewish people. Leads to the destruction of the Second Temple. Again, if you believe there was a first temple, if you believe that the first temple existed or not, completely irrelevant to our political position. But we can verify that the Second Temple at least existed. Well, one has to understand it was the Romans who burnt it down. Alright, so Roman history with Jewish people, not necessarily so good. As maybe what they were upset by is like a great number of the converts to Judaism were Roman, and maybe this pissed off the Roman establishment. Of course, the Roman Empire also had severe issues with the early church. It seems that as the Roman Empire went into decline, there was a lot of bigotry on their end. But anyway, hey, look, Celts would agree with me. The groups that they called the barbarians would agree with me on that. It's not a matter of bigotry, it's just a matter of historically being accurate, you know? So you're seeing here in this picture, Neturei Karta meeting with a leader of Iran, a very important leader of Iran. I don't want to butcher his name, so I'm going to try to say it as best I can. Ahmadinejad, okay? I probably butchered his name. I'm not the best at Farsi. Farsi's not my... It's not only not my first language, I don't have that in my vernacular very well. My time in Iran was largely bypassed by speaking to people who could translate to me. Sometimes people in Iran will go out of their way to speak to you in English, if they can speak English. I have a deep, profound love for Iran. It's interesting that when you're hearing about the protests in Iran, they don't mention that the head leadership, the Khomeini, the current Khomeini, said that a lot of these protests are completely legitimate. The only thing they condemned was the violence. And that the press, by the way, the press, you know, the news media, not censoring it, and they're on the side of the protesters. Some of these protests I understand, especially because most of them are against the free market system, and I will not say anything about the feminist protests until the Bundist movement has come out with a statement on feminism, which is a very complicated issue as to whether the Bundist movement is for or against feminism. That's a separate issue, and that will be approached hopefully soon. So this next picture, anyway, is David Duke with the same leader of Iran. Now, again, I'm really trying not to butcher the guy's name. Ahmadinejad. Alright, he met with David Duke on the same day that Neturei Karta showed up. Now, what I will say about this is Neturei Karta was not necessarily thrilled that he was there. What you have to understand is that the whole reason why David Duke was there was to discredit Neturei Karta. This is provocateuring, this is infiltration, this is counterintelligence program. This is a COINTELPRO tactic. If you are to be discredited, they send in somebody that has a bad association. So all the people, even ultra-Orthodox Jewish people, mind you, all of which are against Zionism, were like, they might have been okay with it more if David Duke hadn't showed up. We have to call this out for what it is. That person is there to discredit you. As soon as you see it, you say that. Now, here's the thing that must be understood. Because the ultra-Orthodox position will always be pretty much, you have to be loyal citizens to whatever country you live in, and the true position of that is that the state of Israel must be the exception to the rule, because anything set up as Jewish sovereignty, there should be not only no loyalty to. If you don't commit treason against a so-called Jewish sovereignty, you're violating Judaism. So the real position for Jewish people in the state of Israel is commit treason or you are against God. And that must be understood. It's either treason against God or treason against the Zionist state. Well, I will just say that, I'm not alone in that, well, then the treason must be towards the Zionist state. That being said, Neturei Karta will not blast the United States of America. You will notice that even when they disagree with the President of the United States of America, they will speak of it as if that president is being duped. Now, I could make a halakha-based argument on why anything involving the American continents and Oceania, by the way, is New Zealand and Australia. I can make the argument that anything involving the New World, we as Jewish people should be against all of its colonialism and pledge our loyalty to the natives. The Bundist movement makes that position. We take that stance in the Bundist movement. However, we first and foremost are solely focused on the United States of America. It doesn't mean that we don't put Canada into question, and it doesn't mean that we don't put New Zealand and Australia into question, and it doesn't mean that we don't side with the Native Americans when they question the statism that cuts up their continent. So, for instance, we are in solidarity with Mexico, but a lot of Mexicans feel that the state apparatus of Mexico should go away. We don't necessarily disagree with that. Our primary focus with the New World is about the United States. We are very concerned with the existence of the United States. We see it as intertwined with the state of Israel's existence. Anyway, so what also needs to be understood is by the time David Duke went to Iran, he had done a lot to change his image. A lot of people don't remember who David Duke actually is. Now, sometimes it's brought up to him that, yeah, he used to be in the Ku Klux Klan. Some of us speculate that he still is in the Ku Klux Klan and that he's a higher-up Grand Wizard and way higher up, that he might even run the entire Ku Klux Klan. That kind of speculation is not here for discussion, and probably will never be here for discussion. But I can see why people think that. I'm not even saying it's wrong. I'm just saying because it's not verified, and so far probably will never be verified, I cannot say too much about that, as we care about accuracy here in the Bundist movement. Now, what I will say without restraint is that this is COINTELPRO. It's obvious that this is COINTELPRO. David Duke showing up to Iran at the same exact time that Neturei Karta shows up at Iran, that is clear proof of COINTELPRO. It serves only one purpose. Not even to say, ooh, white supremacy is with Iran. No, it's simply to discredit Neturei Karta. Every time this happens, we should call out it for COINTELPRO. And if it is unlawful in the eyes of Neturei Karta to do so, then in defense of Neturei Karta, we should be the ones that say, that's provocatory, that's inciting hatred towards Neturei Karta by David Duke being there, this is COINTELPRO. We should always do that. We have to talk about COINTELPRO awareness, and during the end of this documentary, we will approach such. July 11th, 2015. Rabbi David Feldman speaking at Islamic Center in Atlanta, Georgia. Saturday, late evening, Shabbos.
And I really appreciate, first of all, the host here, the Zanabiya Educational Center, Education Islamic Center, and the Sheikhs, the Molana. I really appreciate you having us here. It's really an honor for me for the second time to be here to share with you some thoughts that you might not have the opportunity to hear elsewhere. First of all, I really relate to the point that the Sheikh mentioned before about having a religion hijacked, or having this face in front of a religion to get this false image. We very much relate to this point. We feel this in Judaism as well. This is unfortunately a sad happening amongst our people, amongst our religion also. As everybody knows, the news, CNN and other news outlets are using those militant people out there in the front and put them on the screen to show an image of Judaism, which is totally wrong, as in the case of Islam. There is a question that many people ask: how come that we witness this occupation in Palestine already for decades? We witnessed these atrocities taking place for decades and in our time. It's not only what our grandparents told us, it's what we witness today. And still in all, very few people stand up to speak about it. People ask themselves, how come I don't do enough? And everybody asks this question. There are many answers to this. One of the issues I find is one of the greatest obstacles here is the issue that people would never like to fight Almighty God. Nobody likes to fight a religion. Nobody likes to fight an ethnic group, which ends up with the famous accusation of anti-Semitism. If you speak up against the State of Israel, you're anti-Semite. And if you're Jewish and you speak up, then what? Self-hating Jew. That's right. Now, why? Why do people feel this way, and why would people accuse this way? And the reason for this is a very sad point. The point is the confusion between Judaism and Zionism. It's because the political movement of Zionism had succeeded, are successful by confusing the masses. And as we spoke before, this CNN screen educates this. To have the people believe that Zionism, the political movement of Zionism, creating this political state, and the traditional religion of Judaism is all one and the same. Now, one of the famous issues that is always being raised, and it's so embarrassing and so painful, when we find Bibi Netanyahu standing in front of Congress in Washington, D.C. just not very long ago, standing up and speaking about verses of Judaism, and speaking about religious concepts. And we're talking about a secular Jew, doesn't observe anything within Judaism, doesn't fast on Yom Kippur, and nothing, doesn't keep the Sabbath, nothing, doesn't eat kosher, and would use religion to justify whatever he would like to present. I was once sitting on the international, it's the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people in the United Nations. It's an annual day. And it was like 2 or 3 years ago, I sat in the General Assembly, and that Israeli ambassador to the United Nations stands up, without a cover on his head, stands up and speaks about religion. How embarrassing. The famous quote I always say is the promised land. It's a land promised to the Jewish people. God promised the Holy Land to the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's a famous concept that everybody would use to justify all what Israel is doing. And if you criticize, then you're criticizing Judaism, you're criticizing the Holy Torah, you're criticizing God. God forbid. Now this is all wrong, and let's just stress on this one point, and that'll be enough, at least for short, to understand what's going on. And it's very important. Now the concept of the Promised Land is a true concept. It is in the Torah. God promised the Holy Land for the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But this is one side of the coin. There's the second side of the coin nobody would speak about. And this should be considered falsehood if you just show one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that it was promised to the children of Israel on condition. If you would remain in the land in the level of holiness that God requires of you, you would remain in the land. Otherwise you would be expelled. And this is very clear. It's twice a verse in the Torah. It says, "V'loisuki huretz eschem v'tamachem oisa." The land should not reject you because you defile it. In other words, if you would defile the land, then the land would reject you, basically. Unfortunately, this is what happened. It was several hundred years later. Let's go back a step. This promise was fulfilled. The Jews were brought into the Holy Land. This was 40 years after they were taken out from Egypt by Prophet Moses. 40 years later, they were brought into the Holy Land, and the promise was fulfilled. Several hundred years later, God was not pleased of the behavior of the people at the time. God warned the Jews through the prophets that unless they would repent to the level that God requires, they would be expelled from the land. And unfortunately, this is what happened. And this was by about 2,000 years ago, by the destruction of the temple, where the temple was destroyed and the Jews were driven into exile. Now, this concept of exile was considered a divine decree, not a lack of physical power. This was a direct divine decree. This was the will of God, and this was, sadly, unfortunately, but accepted by all Jews throughout all generations, without any exception. Nobody ever denied the concept of exile, and that as religious Jews, followers of God, we have to accept this, whether it is comfortable or not. Now again, this was accepted by all Jewish people throughout all generations, until approximately 130 years ago, when these founders of the philosophy of Zionism stood up. And these people were not religious scholars, they were not Jewish rabbis, they were outspoken heretics, hating God and hating religion. They happened to come from Jewish descent, but they had no connection at all to the Jewish religion. And they came up with this brilliant solution to this physical problem that Jewish people have. And they totally ignored that there is something religious behind all of this. There is something spiritual behind all of this. The concept of exile is meant to be a punishment, to have those people who are punished repent and turn back to God, and not turn their backs to God. Ever since the beginning of this philosophy of Zionism, all religious leaders, with a very small exception, maybe 5 out of all of them, and these all religious leaders opposed Zionism. The main Jewish community were in Europe at the time, Russia, and almost all religious leaders opposed it, including the religious community in Palestine at the time. Unfortunately, after the Holocaust, when the majority of the Jewish people were killed, the vast majority of Jewish leadership were wiped out, and there was remaining a desperate people, desperate for rescue, desperate for a safe haven. And then, at that point, the Zionist people came and promised those desperate people everything. Just come to us and we'll save you. Many of them were ignorant. Some of them did understand what's going on, but they had no choice. We would not be the people to judge those people, but they were real desperate. And at that point, which is what, 70 some years ago, at that point, the philosophy of Zionism started to come in amongst the Jewish people. But again, it was opposed and still is opposed by masses of Jewish people worldwide. But we have to remember that this state of Israel does not represent anything Jewish. They would use all kinds of Jewish symbols. They would misuse Jewish verses, as I said before, to justify whatever they are doing and to justify all the criminal acts they are doing. They would do anything they can, they would use anything they can, they would do any falsehood possible to silence you, to silence me, to silence whoever dares to stand up and to condemn and to oppose what they are doing. For example, they're using the Star of David, which is an old traditional Jewish symbol. This was never meant to symbolize materialism. This is to symbolize the four corners of the world, the top and the bottom, where God rules over. This is considered a Star of David, going back to King David at the time. King David was a spiritual person. He wrote the Psalms. King David was not about a mighty king. He was about a spiritual king that led his people in spirituality. They usurped our name, Israel. They are using our concept of Jews and Judaism for what? For a wicked movement, and to commit all sorts of crimes, and on top of all, to turn their back to Almighty God. Nobody would say that this state of Israel is about religion. The most they can say is they would be a democracy and allow religion in their state, which is not true. They oppress religion. They oppress Jewish religion in the state of Israel. It's a secular movement, it's a secular state, and it's a state which is against God and against Jewish religion. Yes, they would allow it to a certain extent where they feel it doesn't affect them. Once the religious practice will affect their heretic movement, they would oppress it, and they do. They oppress our people in Jerusalem, they oppress our people in other places. When it comes to the point where they feel affected from what? From the practice of our religion. Now again, they don't represent the Jewish people, they don't represent Jewish religion. There is nothing Jewish in the state of Israel other than the name Jewish they are using, or the name Israel they are using. They are misusing. Again, Jewish people all over the world, whether you would find large, strong communities who would be strong enough to come out in public, or you would find smaller communities, as in Atlanta, Georgia, where you would find individual people that would be against Israel, but not in an organized way that they can manage to come out in public. And we find this all the time. It's really encouraging when we visit Atlanta. We were here yesterday, and I listened to some talks here before, when people of the Jewish religion and of the Muslim religion are very clear by what we are speaking about. When we criticize Israel, we have to be very specific and very clear. We are talking about an injustice taking place. We're not talking about an ethnic group of people. We're not talking about a religion. We can respect a religion. We can respect a people. We have nothing against people as people. We are against violence. We are against oppression. We are against atrocities taking place. We are against occupation. And we should condemn it. We should speak up. If we all will not stand up and speak up, who would? And who would speak up if, God forbid, it shouldn't happen? If we would be oppressed, who would stand up? We have to stand up for justice, we have to stand up for righteousness, and we have to condemn evil, whether it's from other people or from our people. We pray for the speedy and peaceful dismantlement of the state of Israel, this illegitimate movement which is causing death and destruction and uprooting of religion for other people and for the Jewish people. And we hope once this political movement will end, and we believe it will end, God would not allow it to succeed forever. There is a verse in the Torah that says, why are you violating the word of Almighty God? It will not be successful. God allows evil for a specific amount of time, but not forever. This will stop. We hope it should stop in our lifetime. We hope we should be able to see once again that beautiful peace that did exist amongst peoples from many backgrounds, from many cultures, including Palestine. There was a Jewish community, a minority, but a sizable Jewish community in Palestine before all this started. They were living in excellent peace. We have documentation on this. We have stories about this. And I'm sure you have from your communities many stories about this. And we should really look forward for the day when we can see this once again. And once this will be ended, then religious people would be able to practice their religion freely without all of this intimidation. Ultimately, we pray that the glory of the Almighty should be revealed throughout the universe. All mankind together should serve the one God in peace and harmony soon in our days. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
The clip you just saw took place Saturday late evening. This took place right after Shabbos. Alright, we return you to Abraham Weisfeld, PhD, at the World Social Forum, August 8th, 2016, Montreal, Quebec. This presentation will show flashbacks to the Land Day demonstration that took place on March 30th, 2016 at Al-Bazaria. Please watch.
Matter of violence. I was in Nablus over the last period of time. I was living in Nablus together with Palestinians for 5 months during this last winter. And when I arrived, I found that the community center that I helped to establish a computer room for in 2011, when I was there previously, making public access computers there available for free to the internet for Palestinians in Nablus, had been raided by the military, and the soldiers went into the center in the middle of the night and took out all the hard drives from all the computers, stole a laptop, stole all the Wi-Fi keys, and stole a memory stick of 1 terabyte. So I started working on rebuilding the computers, and the service that had been initiated there at the community center, which was broadcasting by internet radio Palestine news, on a bi-weekly basis. And this radio program started to become very popular, and the Zionist, apparatus became aware of it. And in the first few months, there was like more than 1 million people who had listened to the radio broadcast because they were getting news direct from the source that was not censored and not filtered. And so all this was shut down. So I was rebuilding the computers, and then with the camera, I went out to all the various demonstrations and filmed them in order to document them and put them up on my YouTube channel, and established a YouTube channel for the Tanweer Center as well, to continue this medium. So I was at the Land Day demonstration, which is March 30th. And there, a peaceful demonstration, mostly with an older generation of people holding banners and flags. There was no large numbers of youth, who were there, just to throw stones or anything like that. No stones were thrown, not even one stone. And this the Zionist army was there to stop the demonstration from marching down the highway to a village.
On the way to the demonstration for Land Day here in Palestine on the 30th of March 2016, we encounter a blockade on the highway, both from the Zionist police and the military. We go in any case.
The Zionist army was there to stop the demonstration from marching down the highway to a village. But, everybody just walked around the soldiers and went right through, the jeeps and everything like that, and even put Palestinian flags into the jeeps' grills, as a sort of insubordination, a sign of defiance.
The Zionist blockade has stopped traffic entirely on this highway on the way to Tulkarem. Here's a demonstration right in front of the soldiers. Note that the demonstrators are not intimidated at all. And they're eager to take pictures in front of the soldiers. The soldier right behind them.
يلا خلص لا تبتعس عليه والله انا عارف
Here's me start trying to get past the soldier.
انسحاب انسحاب جيش الموت والارهاب انسحاب 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 جيش الموت والارهاب جيش الموت والارهاب جيش الموت والارهاب انسحاب انسحاب جيش الموت والارهاب جيش الموت والارهاب وين ارجع؟ انت الناس شوف انت ارجع
We break through the lines now. The soldiers are helpless. They're calling their commanding officers. Okay, we've made it through the blockade. What's the problem?
I put the flag, look.
Good, I took a
You
picture.
got photo?
Video.
Look.
Yeah.
The Zionist army was there to stop the demonstration from marching down the highway to a village. But, everybody just walked around the soldiers and went right through, the jeeps and everything like that, and even put Palestinian flags into the jeeps' grills, as a sort of insubordination, a sign of defiance. And then the military came and redoubled its numbers and went on top of the hill and set up a barrier that was impenetrable. And people still kept on marching towards this obstruction. So that's when they started shooting tear gas canisters, okay? About big like this, spitting out gas from both sides, you know? That's the model that they use.
More soldiers. More flags on soldiers' jeeps. Yes. Gas is too much for my eyes.
فلسطين عربية. اسعاف 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 اسعاف.
Demonstration stopped. There's blockade up there.
اسعاف اسعاف.
Various people incapacitated by gas. A person being taken into ambulance. Highway is blocked again. There's all the traffic backed up. Demonstrator carrying an olive tree.
يلا يا شباب يلا.
Soldiers are seeking to pass the traffic but stop the demonstration. The demonstrator is back.
Now there's more soldiers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Soldiers are approaching. Approaching because the demonstrators are advancing. Oh, he's the one who's firing tear gas. Firing 4 times. 5. Soldiers are throwing. Why are you trying to stop a peaceful demonstration? Peaceful demonstration. Let it pass. It's just a demonstration, that's all. What's wrong with the demonstration? Just a demonstration, leave it alone. Demonstration advances. So there was, one canister that was on the middle of the road in front of me. People had retreated, but silly me, I stayed there, in front of the military. I kept on filming, as did a number of other people. So one young guy wanted to kick the canister away from himself, but he kicked it to the wrong side of the road. He should have kicked it to the side of the road, which was, where there was an incline going down, and it would have fallen down, but instead he kicked it towards the upside, of the hill, where I was standing, in the gutter, filming. So, of course, I kicked it back. And then the soldiers saw me, and I was fired upon. Oh, hit my leg. Oh, right behind me. Hey, why do you do this? It's only a demonstration. It's just a demonstration. Leave it alone. Water. Here's another one coming. Here. Mia. For the eyes. For the eyes.
بعدين ولا ورا بعدين وركم
Crazy.
يا الله يا الله يا الله wait
Okay.
wait
ايمن متوجه
خذ خذ خذ
خرب بيتي يا ايمن
خذ جهاد
There he is.
لازم جبنا الخوذات والشغلات تبعتنا
تعال هنا تعال هنا تعبت تعبت
One, two, three, four, five, six. At least 6 vehicles. Now the soldiers are coming upon us.
ما فيها بس طلع عليها ثالث منه اياه ما في بس هي ضربه ضربه قديمه لا هي القنبله عندك
شظيه
شظيه مرت
هذا يجيب بسرعه
يعني صوتيه
وغاز يعني انه شايف البيت الشظيه ما
امين ايش مشكلة كيف ايش مشكلة
بس شيء نخفف عليه
ايش ما كان بسرعة
يلا خلاص يلا
هاي في معك بلاستر
في عندي بلاستر لقيت البلاستر بطل الشنطه في عندي يا زلمه افتح الشنطه اللي عندك طول من فوق
Yeah, it's starting to hurt more.
ايوه
خذي هاي
كيف زيادة
فتح لي تنوع وين الامبولانس؟
هاي
اطلعوا الامبولانس يلا اطلعوا الامبولانس
يلا
اطلعوا الامبولانس
لا لا خلاص
هو بيصور حاله بيصور نفسه اطلعوا الامبولانس
سكر الكاميرا احكي له في الانترنت
ستوب كاميرا بليز
خلص مين دهسه؟ انا ضربه شظيه شوف كيف فتح يا شريف
يلا اطلعوا الامبولانس على الامبولانس
خلاص ارميك هذول اعطيني خلص سكر شنطات نوديها على المستشفى هاي لانه هاي عندها
And I was fired upon, and I was hit by a spherical bullet right on the bone here with the leg that I had kicked the canister, their sacred canister. And I was shot right here. And I didn't even notice anything at first, you know, because there's no nerves there. But then it started to swell, and the shock, it's a high velocity projectile. A metal sphere about so big covered in plastic. And they call it a rubber bullet. It sounds very innocuous, you know. But this is a high velocity projectile and it causes damage, you know. If it hits a soft tissue, it will tear the tissue. If it hits an eye, it will destroy an eye. If it hits the skull, it will crack the skull and cause a major concussion. So these are, and they call it a non-lethal method of crowd control. And it's now starting to be used by the police in North America even, you know, because it's classified as non-lethal. However, it can be lethal. And it is a very severe, can cause very severe, injury to a person. I was in shock and didn't realize that I was in shock, which is, a symptom of shock. And I kept on working, went to another demonstration the next morning, went to a conference the next afternoon, and then the following morning, I thought I would climb up a ladder and ended up falling 2 meters down onto the, stone floor. Ended up injuring my back, which I'm still recovering from, and hitting my head, going unconscious, and requiring 4 stitches to stop the bleeding. All because of that. So, and they talk about violence. The first violence is inflicted upon the civilian Palestinians by the Zionist military. Okay. Whether it's called crowd control or whatever, it's still violence. Then, when Palestinians attack, this is a war against the Palestinian people that is being conducted to the greatest extent possible, permitted, by the opposition that they have to endure. So, but when Palestinians retaliate against the military personnel, and spontaneously Palestinians, young Palestinians even, go out and try to attack, a Zionist soldier because a member of their family has recently been killed, and Palestinians are shot with live bullets at demonstrations, non-violent demonstrations even, on an almost daily basis, and a Palestinian with some familial connection to a Palestinian who has been killed goes out and tries to retaliate on their own in a spontaneous fashion without the encouragement, of the political authority in Palestine that has been established from Oslo. They are called terrorists.
On the matter of terrorism, first it is important to know the original Black Panther Party and the American Indian Movement was never terrorist. The Irish Republican Army is not a terrorist organization. The Palestine Liberation Organization and/or Al-Fatah is not a terrorist organization. Hezbollah is not a terrorist organization. The Islamic Republic of Iran is not a terror state. Terrorism is simply the terror tactic used as a means of coercion. Furthermore, a terrorist is someone who specializes in terrorism. Carrying out the actions of 1 or 2 terrorist actions cannot make a person or a group terrorist. For example, it is known that it was an act of terrorism that helped the Palestine Liberation Organization and/or Al-Fatah rise to public attention, yet such actions making any success are very rare. Another example being the Islamic Revolution that occurred in Iran. However, it is known that the Islamic Revolution was waged against a fascist regime. To understand the context of this, it is important to study the Iran-Contra affair. Although sympathetic to the cause of Iran, Gaddafi condemned the taking of hostages. Bundist thinking is in kin to that of Gaddafi on these matters. Genuine terrorist organizations, such as the Weather Underground, were 100% terrorist. How ironic that Bill Ayers, the terrorist, supports gun control, while the police have military weapons. Self-defense and revolution have nothing to do with terrorism. Terrorism is a counter-revolutionary tactic, and we in the Jewish Bundist diaspora movement denounce this worthless tactic. This is a picture of Dr. Abraham Weiswald at the grave of Yasser Arafat. I would say that this is a very, very important photo. He was warmly received. Now, it is very, very important to understand that Palestine has a population of Muslims and Christians. And there's even a Jewish population. And I'm not just talking about ancient Israelite groups like the Samaritans. There is a Jewish population of Palestine. You can even say that although Palestine is the land of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, it's also the land of Druze and Samaritans, which you'll find that that's related as well. You get back into the antiquity of this group, there's a lot more to be seen than what is promoted. And in fact, It's shocking that people who hide behind scriptures don't seem to realize this. And I'll tell you why. It's because they're not reading scriptures. Just go to a Pentecostal rally. You'll notice that all the guy is doing is holding a Bible in his hands and yelling at you. And if he reads any verses, it'll be more than 2 or 3 verses. Then he'll accuse the Catholics of not reading when actually they do read. Although illiteracy was a problem for the Catholics for a long, long time, this is a problem that many of them have overcome, and you could say that they have some of their bigger Bible studies, and they understand these scriptures better because, of course, they can be traced back to the early church. Now, one must understand that Jewish-Muslim relations are much closer than Jewish-Christian relations. This does not mean that there are not Christian relations with Jewish people. What it means is that Jewish-Muslim relations are much stronger. In fact, from a strictly Orthodox sense, and I myself adhere to this. In fact, most of the people in the Bundist movement feel this way, although this is not exactly official policy. But most of us feel this way. Most Jewish people would feel very dirty walking into any type of Christian building, referring to a religious building or even a charity building. Coming from an Orthodox perspective, I myself adhere to that. I cannot walk into a Christian parish without feeling dirty. As no, the Jewish religion and the Christian religion are not innately enemies. However, as far as stances of morality, purity, and notions like that, the two most monolithically squared off religions, these would be Christianity and Judaism. The two closest religions of all time would not be Buddhism and Hinduism, or Taoism and Confucianism, or Sikhism and Jainism. No, the two closest religions of all time would be Judaism and Islam. Now, this is not a hostility towards Christianity. It's just that any real Christian, whether it's an Armenian coming from the Oriental Orthodox Church, or whether it's a Greek coming from the Eastern Orthodox Church, or whether it's a Roman Catholic or a Chaldean coming from the Catholic Church, genuine Christians are aware of this separation. In fact, I guess you could say the plagiarizing of Judaism and the plagiarizing of Christianity is partially what's put Jewish and Christian groups together in solidarity. Now all of a sudden we have an appreciation for those differences, and that's a good thing in a way. Go figure, it should not take disaster for us to find solidarity, but it has, nonetheless. Being that said, we've always had solidarity with the Muslims. And many Muslims who are educated in their own religion are fully aware of this, and many Jewish people who are educated in their own religion are aware of this. Now, it is true that Islam is not a cultural religion, whereas Judaism is a cultural religion. The religious rituals and the perception of the one God, identical. Okay? Yes, Muslims believe that Jesus is the Messiah, whereas Christians believe Jesus is the Messiah and the Savior, and the Muslims reject the idea that Jesus is the Savior, just to be clear, but they do recognize him as the Messiah. So this is a gulf, it's not really a gulf between Jewish and Muslim. It is definitely a dogmatic difference, though. Like, I could never embrace the concept of Jesus as the Messiah. That's like the most repugnant concept to me. However, I'm not offended by people that do believe Jesus is the Messiah. Jesus clearly has inspired a lot of interesting notions for a lot of people. So, there's nothing for me to get upset about. So, of course, Jewish people do not believe Jesus is the Messiah. That's a contradiction to Judaism altogether. And again, no Judaism equals no Jewish. Alright? So if you embrace Jesus in any form of that sort, you're not really Jewish. Or you have defected from World Jewry, and we have always maintained that. In fact, that's like the one for sure way beyond all things to defect. Although we are now, as Bundists, starting to really equate Zionism as another way of defecting, because we see the dangers of Zionism. And we see Chabad as another reason, because Chabad has completely divested from Judaism. Their concept of Messiahhood is in complete contradiction to what Judaism has always said. Therefore, Chabad is no longer Jewish. Now, if you look at this picture, as you see it, this is two Palestinian soldiers. And you see our beloved Dr. Abraham Weisfeld standing there at the grave of Yasser Arafat. By the way, he never stands a 10 hut, but he is in this sense. I'm the same way. I never stand 10 hut. You put me around Marines, I'm never going to salute them. And I definitely won't salute Israeli soldiers. But I would if it was the PLO. If it's the PLO or Al-Fatah PLO, if it's anything to do with the Palestine Liberation Organization, I would 10 hut to that. That's worth doing so. And that makes perfect sense from a Bundist point of view. The reason why it seems like the capitalist world is making it impossible to resist them is not because socialism does not work, nor is it because religion is something unpractical. One of the most major reasons why any progress towards a better future is held back is because of networks that operate under the tactics of COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO, an acronym for Counterintelligence Program. And although it is believed by many that this operation is no longer in use, there is just way too much evidence to the contrary. With the revelations of Edward Snowden and the multitude of declassified information as well as leaked information, it is all too clear that COINTELPRO still runs in operation, and even to a more high-tech manner. The reason why Bundists are not always quick to embrace every single conspiracy theory is not because we are unaware of conspiracies. The reason is that most conspiracy theories are manufactured as part of the operation of COINTELPRO. It is unlikely that COINTELPRO is still called COINTELPRO by those who participate in that operation. We Bundists call it COINTELPRO because that is the best description for that type of operation. We aim to raise COINTELPRO awareness and even show others how to identify when an agent or informant is attempting to destabilize a grassroots organization. One of the chief goals of the Jewish Bundist diaspora movement is the establishment of the Jewish International Bund. The Jewish Orthodox policies of the Jewish Bundist diaspora movement will shape the rules for this new Jewish International Bund. The socialism of the Jewish Bundists will be the foundation for the Jewish economic and political theory and practice of this Jewish International Bund. The League of Nations failed to solve the problems of the world. Imperialists cannot pass judgment on other imperialists. The Nuremberg trials was a breakthrough, yet it was still underachieving. The United Nations was an improvement, yet it has not solved the major world crisis of genocide, human rights abuses, or world hunger. This is because debt rules the policy of globalism. Globalism is a capitalist method of stonewalling the poor. The answer can only be found in internationalism and world federalism. Banks exist to hold and store money. For that very reason, banks must never be allowed to print money. It is the duty of public treasuries to print money, not banks. Nationalizing private central banks will do nothing except make people comfortable and complacent so that the bankers can work to denationalize and reprivatize their banks. In the United States of America, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had managed to nationalize the Federal Reserve with the Glass-Steagall Banking Act of 1933. Then President William Jefferson Clinton repealed this in 1999, and then the Federal Reserve was reprivatized. Centrist reforms do not work. Public treasuries must replace central banks, and they must be audited every 2 years, if not made completely transparent. Public treasuries should be local and transcontinental, and a world court must exist to hold governments accountable, and the judges should be civilian. Those holding government office should be banned from holding these court offices. Finally, all education needs to be made free and accessible. Take a moment every day to think about the Kurdish nation. Do they need a state? No. The Kurdish nation needs collective national rights. National cultural autonomy is when nations are self-governing, living by their own laws, recognized in a system of world affairs. What the communists, that is both Marxists and anarchists, fail to realize is that nation is not the state, and that not every country throughout history has been a state. You cannot solve the world's problems by forcing Eurocentric ideas upon the world. George William Friedrich Hegel fabricated the very ideas of the nation-state. Marxists are stuck in the false ideas of George William Friedrich Hegel. Anarchists usually do not understand that country and state are not always the same. Marxists tend to confuse nation and state as the same thing. National security is the flavor of justification fabricated by the brutes who trample on liberty and autonomy. Long live the Jewish diaspora and the national cultural autonomy of all wandering nations. The state of Israel is not Jewish, and that state will never be Jewish.